It is Wednesday, the 25th of April, 2018, and this is your EV News Daily. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. In fact, wherever you're listening around the world, a very warm welcome from London in the UK. Here is today's news about electric cars and the future of transport. My name is Martin Lee, and I go through every EV article online, so you don't have to. Well, firstly, we're 100 shows in. Happy birthday to us, and thank you for listening. I texted my wife Emma earlier today to mark the occasion, and just to remind her that the first month I released the podcast, back in January at the beginning of the year, it had a grand total of 106 downloads across the entire month. And I don't mean that in any kind of arrogant way that I was expecting more. For anyone to care about a little podcast about electric cars, only on iTunes at the time as well, but it was a lot of effort and nobody was listening. Well, fast forward 100 shows and the growth is exponential. So thank you so much for sharing it online, on Twitter, on Facebook, on things like the Speak EV forum. I found a forum today where someone diligently posts a link to the YouTube audio every day. So thank you. Now, the downloads are in the thousands these days, and that makes me want to do a better job every day and every time I see that increase. Well, secondly, I hope that whilst my experience in what I do for a job, which is making and running and being on national radio stations, can help in some way spread the word about EVs to a wider audience. Equally, your feedback is the most important thing. Now, to that effect, I'm going to change how we title each show, so it's going to look slightly different in your podcast feed, your app, however you download it. I'm going to put the date first, which will help on those devices where you only see the first few characters. That's only in a couple of instances. I've been looking into this the last couple of days, but we'll start with the date now. And secondly, I'm delighted to say the archive is now on SoundCloud. And thank you for all of those people who have been asking for me to publish on SoundCloud. And I could have just started putting the new ones on there as of last week, but I wanted to get all the old ones on, and that was a bit of a task actually to get it done. So they're on there now. Thank you for your patience. Another place for you to download the podcast. Well, here is the news, and there are two exciting new EV racing series on the horizon. One of them is the Jaguar I-PACE series, which is going to support Formula E. The other is Electric GT, which will be racing Tesla Model S P100DLs. And Electric GT just announced the calendar for their inaugural series after being officially approved by motorsport's governing body, the FIA. There's going to be 10 races for the first season, starting in Spain on November 3rd this year, and that'll follow a short test in October. Well, each event will be a mini festival of electrical engineering, and the racing will involve a practice session, a qualifying session, a race, and a dusk race. There'll also be some online involvement as well, like e-racing and electric go-karting at the events as well. And that's one of the great things about electric racing. You can do it at times when you wouldn't normally be allowed with other series to get a license due to the noise pollution. Well, there isn't any. They will race in France and Spain and Germany and the Netherlands and Silverstone and Portugal. And they're going to be at circuits like Jerez and Paul Ricard and the Nurburgring and Silverstone. These are Formula One circuits at some time in history with a rich heritage, which is going to help give this new series some real gravitas with petrol heads, and something I think Formula E is going to probably fix quite soon. Those city races they do, the circuits they have in Formula E, they're great, but also they lack a little bit of heritage in some ways. Plus, the car's going to be more powerful soon, so a lot of those courses, they need to be bigger and wider and longer. Well, talking of Formula One, former Scuderia Ferrari boss Stefano Domenicali now heads up Lamborghini, and he says their next hypercar will be electrified. We are talking the Aventador and the Huracan when they're updated. Well, full EVs are also on the cards, but not quite yet. He says, I quote, "I don't think the technology for a full electric Lamborghini will be ready until 2026. Hybrids are a step towards that." Well, Lamborghini's technical director Maurizio Reggiani told Top Gear, I quote, "The big questions are packaging and weight. Yes, this will be a silent Lamborghini, but push the accelerator and the engine will come. Silence will only last for some seconds, then will come the sound, end quote. So it sounds like he's still almost making excuses for having hybrid technology in a Lamborghini, saying, hey, we're going to have batteries, but don't worry, the engine comes on if you push it really hard. Well, next up, another sports car, the legendary Porsche 911. Don't tell me this is going to get batteries. Yes, electric power is going to be used for the very first time in the most legendary of all Porsches. And again, it will be a hybrid, perhaps with a new engine, which might upset a few of the Porsche purists. Now, August ANNOUCNE, he's the director of the 911's development team. He said, and I quote, some fans rushed the barricades. It was all doom and gloom for many, and then the same thing happened as always. Nothing. The new models have always received more rave reviews than their predecessors. That encourages us to think about fundamental innovations in the future as well. End quote. Well, cities like Shenzhen already have their public buses running on batteries. That's over 16,000 EV buses, like the BYD ones you might have seen. Well, their next plan in Shenzhen is for 17,000 cabs to be all-electric too. So, Western cities need to catch up quickly. A sidebar here, by the way, whilst China is producing hundreds of thousands of electric cars and buses, our own media only seem to want to talk about Elon Musk's latest tweet. Now, one day, everybody is going to turn around and realize China are making the next car that you buy, like they make everything else. Don't say we didn't warn you. They're already doing it. But nobody seems to be reporting it as much as what Elon had for breakfast. Well, back to the buses then. And Paris is going to see 1,000 new full BEVs buses, which is part of a larger plan to electrify all the Parisian buses by 2025. Now, RATP has 4,500 buses to replace, and Catherine Guillard, who is the president and CEO of RATP, said, I quote, the massive order to equip our fleet with electric buses demonstrates our ambition to become a vital player in the energy transition of the public transport sector. Our aim is to ensure 100% clean fleet by 2025 in the Paris region. Is what can only be described as a technological challenge that requires us to adapt our bus depots within a very tight time frame. The entire company has been mobilized to succeed with this challenge, end quote. And that's true. It is a big job. I'm not playing down what has to be done. But it's a job that Chinese cities are doing or have already done. The buses, the depots, the grid upgrades for the electrical ties to those depots, the on-street chargers, the rapid chargers, the top-ups mid-route. Yeah, they've all been done. So Paris saying, hey, we're going to do it 7 years. You know, it's good, but it's not first. Well, tomorrow on the show, I'll take a deep dive into the general state of electrified mass transport. Well, moving on and calling all Mitsubishi Outlander owners in the UK. They're currently looking for owners and drivers of the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid that was purchased from new for a paid market research event being held in London between the 8th and the 10th of May this year. The project's being conducted on behalf of major car manufacturers, and they're interested in gaining feedback from owners regarding EV experiences and their ideas on EV markets. For anyone who wants to take part, it'll take an hour and a half, and you get 80 quid, plus you get to give your opinion. I'm not sure who's holding this. Maybe it's for a competitor to Mitsubishi, or maybe it's them themselves. I've put a link in the podcast notes if this applies to you and you want to find out more. Well, the legendary Ford F-150 truck in the USA isn't something you can imagine as being the first candidate for being an EV, but they're seen as a way to reduce carbon emissions for some truck customers, and therefore the trucks are being built by Ford and electrified by Excel. In addition to some plug-in charging capabilities, the truck's technology also uses a bit of regen braking during deceleration to charge the battery pack up, and it uses electric assist during acceleration to increase the fuel economy. Now, Eric Fulmer is Excel's Director of Marketing. He said, I quote, because the Excel plug-in hybrid system works seamlessly with the Ford drivetrain, it works and drives like a factory F-150 would, but with a 50% improvement in MPG and substantial reduction in CO2 emissions, end quote. I know there's lots of people listen to the podcast in the USA, and so for anyone who doesn't, bear with me, anyone who doesn't understand how big Ford trucks are, the legendary F-150 and the bigger versions as well. By no means is my knowledge extensive on these, but by the way, to electrify those is like a big deal for some people who hold the Ford F-150 and the other trucks just so high. Right, moving on. Liverpool, back in the UK, is best known maybe for the Beatles, and around the world these days for having a huge international following for Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool Football Club, or soccer, if you like. But now it's becoming famous for EVs, as 60 more charging points are added to sites like hospitals, train stations, car parks, sports venues, and even Jaguar Land Rover. Well, John Robinson's the managing director of Symphony EVZE, or ZE, depending on where you're listening, said we're currently working with Arriva to install the infrastructure for super fast, rapid charging for their electric buses in the Liverpool region. Now, moving on, and we've heard some whispers, we've seen some teaser pictures, and now Mercedes Maybach have shown off their luxury electric crossover, the Vision, it's called. And it happened this week at the Auto China 2018 show that's happening in China right now. It's an EV with 4 motors, which makes it all-wheel drive. And of course, it's a Maybach, so it is the very height of luxury. Now, it's a concept vehicle at this stage, which always means if it's a concept, it runs on magical fairy dust. However, Maybach do assure us the specs are realistic. Those specs being 550 kilowatts of power, 750 horsepower, and an 80 kilowatt hour battery, which I think is small for a Maybach. This is going to be a big 2.5 ton, huge luxury car. You got a lot of room for a battery. Stick a 100 kilowatt hour pack in there. Plus, your customers are going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on this. They want range, whether they use it or not. They want range bragging rights on the golf course. 80 kilowatt hours not going to cut it for a car like that. Anyway, maybe it will. They're going to build it with DC fast charging, 350 kilowatts for the elusive 80% charge in less than 20 minutes. Or for slower speeds, they're going to put induction charging in because sometimes you're just too posh to touch a cable. And finally, in a recent media session, Nissan Renault Mitsubishi chairman Carlos Ghosn said, and I quote, "We've seen that consumers don't talk anymore about range or autonomy as long as you guarantee 300 kilometers. You could not have guessed this result through studies. When you look at what the electric Chinese cars are selling for these days, they are very, very affordable cars. The price point of the Leaf today is not adequate for the Chinese market," end quote. So let's take that apart a little bit. First of all, he says that range anxiety doesn't exist if you can sell a car at 300 Ks. Then he says that Chinese cars are cheap, 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 and even Nissans are not in that price range. Well, his very own Renault Zoe ZE40, that gets marketed at 300 kilometers range. The upcoming 60 kilowatt hour Leaf with LG Chem cells and a bit of thermal management in there to keep them at very happy temperatures. That's going to get probably, I'm guessing, 350 kilometers on the new WLTP cycle. That's me sticking my finger in the air and seeing which way the wind is blowing. I'm guessing 225 miles for the long-range Nissan Leaf. Maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. Well, I'd love to spread the word about electric cars. If you can, please do share the podcast with at least one person who may be interested. You can listen to every previous episode of the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, TuneIn, Stitcher, and the blog, evnewsdaily.com. Remember to subscribe, which means you haven't got to think about downloading the show each day, so you get it first and free and automatically. And it would mean a lot. In return, I do this all for free, and I put the archive online for free if you could take just 2 minutes to rate and review on whichever platform you download us on. If you have an Amazon Echo, get the skill for your morning flash briefing, search EV News Daily, and say hi on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn by searching EV News Daily, and let's chat on the socials. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you tomorrow.